Hello, my name is Jerry Bond. I have a class on yeasted pumpkin bread. I'm a home baker who has been baking for about 25 or 30 years. I started baking when my wife went to night school, and I would start making her desserts so when she came home from school she had something to eat, and has progressed from there to baking quite a bit. So today, like I said, we're going to be doing a yeasted pumpkin bread. It is nothing like what you would normally consider a pumpkin bread, which has a chemical leavening in it and takes a very short time to put together and bake. So first thing we're going to do is, if you have my step-by-step, it'll have a list of all your ingredients and your equipment. The best thing to do is, if it's calling for milk and eggs and honey, is to have it all out for a while so it is at room temperature, because if you put cold milk in, it's going to slow the process down. So it's a little bit good preparation to get everything out to room temperature. Your eggs also. So what we're going to do first is we're going to make a sponge. That's going to include our milk, yeast, the eggs, honey, part of the flour, and the cornmeal. And we're going to put all that together, and we're going to let it sit at room temperature for about 30 minutes or so. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our milk, and our milk is called for 6 1/4 ounces or 3/4 cups. So I have 3/4 cup of milk going in. And if you're weighing, which I have a scale I weigh, it comes out to about 177 grams. Now you're going to add your yeast. Most of you may find a package of yeast like this in the grocery store. It is fine. I use active dry yeast. That type of yeast needs to be hydrated, so I have to put it in my milk to hydrate. What I use, I get it bulk from a store in Frederick called Common Market. I keep it in a jar like this, and while it's not being used, I store it in the freezer. Once I'm ready to use it, I take it out of the freezer and I measure it out and I put it back in the freezer. So for this, it calls for a tablespoon and a teaspoon of yeast. One of these packets is about 2 1/4 teaspoons. So it would be a packet and a little over half of a packet for this recipe. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to measure out my tablespoon and a teaspoon. You just put it right in your milk. Tablespoon and a teaspoon. Next, we're going to put our pumpkin puree in. It calls for pumpkin puree, which is all pumpkin. If you go to the store and find a can that says pumpkin pie mix, you do not want to use that. You want to use pumpkin puree. It'll say it right on the package that it's pumpkin puree, not anything else. You don't want all the extra sugar and spices in there. So you add your pumpkin puree in. That comes out to about 8 ounces. Then you want to put honey in. It doesn't matter which type of honey you use. Any flavor variety. You don't want to get anything too strong, because then it will overpower the taste of the bread. So the honey calls for 6 ounces. This is a large jar, so I'm going to take it easy and go slow. I'm measuring by weight. You can do it if you just want to use measuring cups if you do not have a scale. And I'll tell you in a second what 6 ounces is. Ounces of honey comes out to about a half a cup. So if you don't have a scale and you're using a measuring cup, it's a half cup. Next, you want to put 2 egg yolks in. Just the yolk. You don't want to use the whites. You can save the white for later. You don't need it for this bread, but you could use it for something else. You're just going to separate the yolk out. And now you're going to put cornmeal in. We use a 1/4 cup of cornmeal. It can be white cornmeal, it can be yellow cornmeal, it can be blue cornmeal. It does not matter. It just adds a nice little texture and flavor into your bread. You just add that in. I'm going to wash my hands a bit to get the honey off. And now you take your whisk and you're just going to, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one important project. We're going to put our flour in. We're going to put not all the flour, but just 1½ cups. Just goes in. Take your whisk. You're going to whisk it up. The honey is going to be very thick in there to start with, but if you once you work the flour into it, it'll smooth out. You want to make sure the egg yolks get well incorporated. Get all your flour incorporated. So you get a nice smooth batter. Okay, once you have that done, you're going to take a piece of saran wrap or towel, whichever you have, and you're going to set that aside for about 15 minutes. You're going to let it start activating. I'm going to just set it over here. Now, you're going to take another one of your bowls. While that is resting, you're going to take another clean bowl, and we're going to mix our rest of our flour and our spices and salt in here. Okay, this is going to be a 2¼ cups of flour, or 332 grams. Once you have that, then you're going to take your spice. Well, first off, let's add our salt to it. We want to put 2½ teaspoons of salt. This is just plain sea salt. Any salt that you would get in the store. 2 teaspoons of salt. Then we're going to use a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then a ½ teaspoon of ground ginger and ground clove. ½ teaspoon of each. Once that's all together, you want to just whisk it together. If you do not have a second whisk, you want to clean the other one off because it has the wet dough on it. I have a second whisk, so I can just take my whisk. You just want to whisk it all together so you have all of it is well distributed. And you'll just set that aside until your 15 to 20 minutes is up on your sponge. So we'll see you back in about 15 minutes. Welcome back. Our sponge has rested. It won't look a whole lot different than what it did before. What we're going to do now is we're going to take our bowl of flour that is mixed with our spices and our salt. We're going to put it into our sponge, and if you have a mixer, which I have similar to this, you can hook your dough hook up on it and turn it on a low speed and mix it up. If you do not have a dough hook and you're going to do this by hand, what you want to do first is take your mixing spoon and you're going to mix it together. And you just want to mix it so it gets very all incorporated. We have one more ingredient to put in, and that is our butter. But this is an enriched dough. That means it has extra fat and sugars in it other than what the flour brings to it. And if you're going to be adding butter into dough, you want to mix it prior to putting the butter in, because butter, with all the fat that is in it, inhibits gluten production. So what you want to do is get the gluten started a while and then add the butter. If you're doing it by hand like this, you'll see it is starting to clean the sides. That's a good sign. If you're using the mixer, it should be doing the same thing. It'll clean the sides. And once you get to the point where it's getting really hard to mix, you want to add your butter in. What I did is I took our butter, 4 ounces, which is 8 tablespoons, or 1 stick of butter if you're using the sticks. I melted it a little bit so it's easier to incorporate. You just add your butter in. And if you're doing it by hand, you just start mixing it together. I'm going to switch over to the mixer at this time. If you're doing it by hand, you just keep mixing. When it gets too hard to mix in the bowl, I'll show you what to do next after this mixes a little bit with the mixer. This is a dough hook. This dough hook works for my mixer, which is a KitchenAid. Dough hooks come in different sizes and styles depending on which mixer you have. So I'm just going to hook this in. If you're using a dough hook, you want to turn the mixer to the lowest speed. You do not want to go any faster than that. And it will just mix it. It does what your hands do. It's just you don't have to use your hands as much. It gets to the point where my hands just can't do it anymore. And you'll keep mixing this until it comes together in a nice ball. And if it seems like it's a little bit too wet, you're going to be adding some more flour in, but you want to let it go a little bit to start forming some gluten. The gluten is what will pull the dough together into the ball. Gluten is elastic type strands that interlock and give the dough the body. what you can do is you can turn it off. Just be in that direction. Scrape down the sides to make sure it's getting all mixed up. And you may have to add more flour. It all depends on the time of year and the type of flour that you use. All flour has different hydration rates, which means how much water and how fast it draws in. Also, if it's very humid out, the flour will have some moisture in it already, so it won't be able to pull in as much moisture as you're giving it. That's why you want to keep an eye on it, and if it looks like it needs more flour and it's not pulling into a ball, you would add a little bit more flour. You want to do it just a little bit at a time, because you don't want to put a large amount, because once you do that, you can't take the flour out. And you don't want to be adding any more liquid in there. And the kneading's going to take about 5 or 6 minutes. If you're doing it by hand, it's going to take a little bit longer. This is starting to come together. It's starting to pull a little bit away from the sides. It's just sometimes you get a little anxious. You want it to happen now, and it just takes time. And in here, I don't know if you can see it, but the butter is not fully incorporated. You can still see pieces of butter. Okay, what I'm going to do now, the people that are using the mixer, you keep mixing it until it turns into a ball. I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it out on the counter and show you how I knead it by hand. What you want to do is you want to put some flour down on your work surface. Put some flour on your hands. You want to get all the dough off. Well, I'm getting it off the dough hook. If you were doing it by hand, you wouldn't have the dough hook to worry about. Get all the dough out of your bowl. Sprinkle a little dough on top. And you're just going to, it's a very, very soft dough. You want to just work it. If you're afraid to get flour all over yourself and everything else, you're in the wrong business. I'm always covered with flour. And if you have what is called a bench scraper, which is this tool, it helps. You don't have to put as much flour in. It helps peel the dough up. When you have a very nice soft dough, it's not horribly sticky. As the books say, you want it tacky, not sticky. That's what they say. It's interesting use of words. It forms a nice ball. Very nice. And if you're using your mixer, it should come out to like this. If you need to, you add a little bit more flour until you get a nice ball in your bowl. Then you're going to take another bowl. You can use the one you had, that's fine, but you'd have to clean it out. Clean it and dry it. I have an extra bowl, I'm going to use that. What you do is you take spray oil. I use the spray oil. You can use regular vegetable oil and just coat the inside of the bowl. That's fine also. I find that spray oil, you don't use as much and it doesn't get as glopped around the bowl and on the dough. You just want to spray the bowl, have nice coating in it. You're going to take your dough, you're going to put the top side down first, then you're going to roll it over. That way there's a little bit of coating of oil on the top of your dough, so it's nice and shiny. Then you're going to either cover it with a lid or saran wrap. Then you're going to put it into a nice warm place at room temperature for about 2 hours. And I'll see you in 2 hours to check to make sure your dough is ready. It will have almost doubled in size. And then we'll go from there. So I'll see you in a bit. Welcome back to Yeasted Pumpkin Bread. Your dough should have about doubled in volume. This is what mine looks right now. The way you can tell if it's ready, you take your finger, gently push in, and if the indentation stays, like that one did, that means you're ready to go. Now you have several options to use right now. What we're going to do is we're going to roll the dough out onto our work surface. We're going to shape it, and then we have to put it someplace to let it rise again. Like I said, there's several options. You can do it freestanding. If you do it freestanding, what you'll be doing is be putting it on a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper, and I'm going to sprinkle some cornmeal on it. That's one option. If you want to get a little bit more creative, you can have a basket like this. It's called a bâton. It is just a wooden basket with a linen liner. You would sprinkle some flour or rice flour in it, then you would put your dough in it to proof. If you don't have one of these, but you would like to try this, you can use a colander, a small bowl, whatever you would like. You would just have to line it with a piece of linen. You don't want to use a terry cloth towel or anything like that, because then you would get fuzz in your dough. So what you would do is you just take a piece of linen, fold it into your bowl, sprinkle some flour or rice flour in it, and put your formed dough in it. What I'm going to do, or another option, if you have what is called a baking steel or a baking stone, which would be in your oven, you would be just using a wooden peel. This is a wooden peel. It's what the guys at the pizza place use. What you would do is you put some cornmeal down, or you could put a piece of parchment down and cornmeal on top of that. When you go to put it in the oven, in your oven would be either a pizza stone, which is a unglazed ceramic tile that is in the oven and is heated as the oven heats. You would then slide your dough directly onto the pizza stone, and you get a nice crust on the bottom, and it cooks very nicely. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to use my basket, and I'm going to use my parchment on here, because this is what more people will have. So what you do, if you're using the parchment and this cookie sheet, you take a little bit of cornmeal, and you just want to sprinkle it over. So what that does is when the dough gets in contact with that and you cook it, you have a nice texture and crunch on the bottom of the dough. With my basket, I'm going to take some of my rice flour, sprinkle it inside, and then I'm going to put my formed dough in that. I'm going to set these off to the side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out my dough onto my work surface. And you're going to divide this into 2 equal parts. If you have a scale, what you would do is put your dough back into your bowl on the scale, and it weighs 3 pounds. So you would have 1.5 pounds piece of dough each. So you would just roll it back out again. If you don't have a scale, what you can do is you can try to eyeball it and see how good you are. So I'm going to see if I can get 1.5 pounds piece of dough out of this. Almost 1 pound 7 5/8. That was really close. Very good. Now with the piece of dough that you have out, you want to shape it in a ball. What you want to do, flatten it out a little bit. You're going to fold it over. It's going to be a little sticky if you don't like the stickiness. Get a little bit of flour on your hands, not a whole lot, because you want to have some surface tension because you're going to turn the dough to make a nice film and skin on it. You want to tuck it in and turn it, tuck it in and turn it. So the front hand, your fingers are tucking it in, and then you give it a little twist. And once you've gone all the way around, you have a nice tight, you want to take it again and just spin it. And that's why you don't want too much flour on it to get a nice tight skim on it. With this one, I'm going to put it in my basket. So what you do, you're going to pick it up and you're going to put the top, you're going to invert it so the bottom is upside down. Take it, it's going to look like this. You just put it in there. And then you take a little bit of your flour, sprinkle it on top of that, cover it with a piece of plastic. This helps it from drying out. The flour is on there to keep it from sticking to your plastic. And then you set it off to the side in a nice warm place at room temperature. This other one, what we're going to do, we're going to use the cookie sheet. Some flour on my fingers. Fold it over. My hands are getting sticky. A little bit of flour. Tuck it in and rotate it. Tuck it in and rotate it. And you want to just turn it. So you have a nice round ball. Bring your cookie sheet over with your cornmeal on it. And with this one, you do not invert it. You set it down on its bottom. Just like this. Take a little bit of flour, sprinkle it on top. Cover it with a piece of plastic. And we want to let it rise about 1.5 to 2 times, which should take about 2 hours, 1.5 hours, 2 hours. And what you want to do is to check it again. You just come with your finger. You can do it through the plastic. You push in, and if it stays indentated, then you know you're ready. But you want it to grow about, like I said, 1.5 to 2 times. So we'll see in about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Hello, we're back again. Our loaves have risen and they're getting ready to go into the oven. In prior planning for this, you would want to turn your oven on between 35 and 45 minutes before you're ready to bake the bread. So what I do is I go in and check the bread. You can, like I said before, it'll be doubled in size. So if you can go and you see it's about a size or size and a half larger than it was, you can come and press it and you have an indentation. That means it's ready to go, but you wanted to get it a little before that so you can turn the oven on so it's heated, ready to go when you're ready to put it in the oven. So with these breads, what you need to do before it goes into the oven is score it. Scoring it means you take a sharp implement and cut the top of the bread. So when it goes in the oven, it's called what is called oven spring. It rises very fast. When it does that, if you do not slit it on the top, it will break all around the edges and will come apart. So you want to have an area where it will split, and you can make it very decorative by doing that, which we're going to show you with the other loaf. This is just going to be plain loaf. To score it, you can use something you have around the house. If you have a sharp knife, I have used a serrated bread knife. It works very well. You just 1, 2, 3, or you can make a little decorative design on it. You can also use scissors of some sort. You can snip it, it makes a design on it. You want to do something so it will rise. Also, they have what's called a lame. It's a French word and it basically means a razor blade. And you just go across it any which way you want. You just want to score it. And it comes in many different styles and sizes. This is my personal favorite. I can actually make it work. Other ones I have trouble with, but this one works well. So if you want it to be very decorative, you can take a little bit of flour, put it over top, and it makes a nice design on it, which we will do here. You don't have to use the flour. If it's your first time making something, you might want to just go plain, which is fine. What you can do is you put a little bit of flour in a sieve, sprinkle it over the top, and then go very, very gently with your hand to get a nice coating on it. Just make sure you're being very gentle with it. Don't have any big clumps of flour on it. Then you take your lame and you cut it. I'm not very decorative with this. You'll see decorations on the other loaf. That's all you basically have to do. If you do not have a peel and if you do not have a baking stone in your oven, you can put this in directly into the oven on the cookie sheet. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to transfer it to my peel, and then I'm going to use the peel to put the bread in the oven. Also, an advanced technique that I use, you don't have to do this on this first try, is I will take a pot which I've put a little bit of moisture in. I'm going to put the bread in the oven. I'm going to invert the pot over top of the bread. What that does, it keeps a steam bath over top of the bread, which helps caramelize the crust. So you get a nice crunchy crust, a nice golden brown crust. So that's what we're going to do right now. Okay, I'm going to transfer the bread to the peel at this time. Now, I use my oven gloves because the oven is quite warm. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slide the bread and the parchment paper onto my baking stone that is in the oven. Then I'm going to invert the pot over top of the loaf. Then I'm going to close it up, and then we're going to go to the second loaf. Okay, now we're going to move into the second loaf, the one that I had in the basket. I'm going to turn this over to my wife.
Okay, so we will demonstrate now kind of a decorative preparation to make the loaf kind of look like a pumpkin. So we're going to create ribs in the pumpkin, or ribs in the bread, to make it imitate a pumpkin. What you'll need for this, if you choose to do it, is some kitchen twine. So just a cotton kitchen twine that you get at the grocery store, and it's made to be put in the oven. Like a lot of people use it to tie a turkey, tie turkey legs together, or tie a chicken, or tie a roast if you're stuffing it. So that's available in the grocery store. And you need 4 lengths of twine that are about 18 inches. The measurement isn't precise. And you'll probably at 18 inches have a little bit more than you need, but 18 inches is it gives you enough to tie. You don't want to struggle in your tying. So you need 4 strings that are 18 inches long, and you're going to want to soak those strings a little bit in oil. It gets a little bit messy, but it keeps the strings from sticking to your loaf. So here I've got my oiled strings. Try to untangle them without tying a knot in them. All right, and here we have our bread that was in our baton. I'll set that aside for a second. And here's my lemay. This is my favorite one. So I'm going to set that all aside, and I'm going to set up the strings in a way that is kind of a cross with cross patterns. I don't know if that makes sense. So I want one string going straight that way, and I want one string 90 degrees to that. And then I'm going to create like a pie or a star and go diagonally in both directions. And that's going to create 8 segments in my pumpkin bread. All right? So I've got my strings laid out, and the next thing I need to do is get my dough out of my baton and just gently, I'm going to put my hand under it, I'm going to gently roll it over, and then carefully set it right in the middle of my strings, and then we simply tie them. So in order to make our design stand out a little bit more, to create a little bit more contrast, it helps to put a little flour on the top of it, and then you rub it to gently cover the entire thing. The more white it is, the more contrast you'll get, and your design will show up better. So then I'm just going to start tying. And you don't want to tie it tight so that it squeezes the loaf. The rise of the loaf will do the squeezing for you. So you're just going to kind of tie it right in the middle. It's a little oily, so your fingers start to get a little sticky. There we go. You don't want it too loose or it won't make the effect, but like I said, you don't want to squeeze it. And I tie a double knot so that it doesn't come off while the bread is rising. So the bread will put some pressure on the string as it rises in the oven. And then the last thing that we're going to do, if you want to, you could just stop here, and you'll have a fun loaf, and people will be like, "Whoa, how'd you do that? That's amazing." But you could take it another step. These kind of get in the way, all these little extra strings, so I kind of try to just tie them up to shorten them and so they're not really in the way of when I'm trying to create my cuts. And then you can treat each little section as an area to put designs. So I really like kind of a leaf pattern, and what happens when you make a slit is the slit will open into a leaf pattern. Okay, so if it's just a slit like that, when the bread springs, it'll open up and look kind of like a leaf, and I really like that design. So that's what I do in each of the segments of the pumpkin. I just put one in the middle and then angle a few away. So it'll end up looking a little bit like a fern, maybe, if you had to describe it, what kind of a leaf it would look like. It's important that your knife, that your razor blade is super sharp, so don't be cheap and not change them frequently. I couldn't really say how many loaves you get out of a blade, but it really depends on how much cutting you do. And you have to be kind of decisive with it. If you're tentative, it's going to pull and not really make a nice clean cut. So, just like be committed to your cuts. There we go. Okay, so I have a nice little design in each of the segments, and then we're going to do the same thing with this loaf as we did with the other loaf, which is put it in the oven and cover it with a stainless steel bowl, and that creates as Jerry said, it creates a steam kind of atmosphere, which helps it spring and also gives you more caramelization.
That's my stuff. Welcome back. Our loaves are in the oven. We're going to go in for our first check. You want to check them after about, if you put the bowls on top, you want to check it after about 7 or 8 minutes. Then you want to take the bowls off. If you did not use the bowls, you want to check it after about 15 minutes. And if it's on the cookie sheet, rotate it 180 degrees. That way you get an even cook all the way around. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the bowl off of the first loaf we put in, spin it, and then the other loaf you'll see in the oven, that is the second loaf we put in, needs a couple more minutes with the bowl on top. Remember to use your gloves because it's hot in there. Okay. As you can see, the scoring showed up. The flour on it made it a nice design. It's going to go in. It's strong enough now that I can rotate it. Put you back in. And then in another 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to take the other one off. Okay, we're going to go in and check the second loaf that we put in and take the pot off of it. You can see the indentations are coming in, the leaf shape marks around the edges are coming in. Doing very good. I'm not going to move it for now, it's still not set enough. This one's getting a little bit browner. So we're going to put it back in and check it in about 10 minutes. Okay, going to go in and check the loaves again. See how they're looking. The first one we put in is getting nice and dark and beautiful. This one is coming along very nicely. If you're cooking on your cookie sheet, just spin the whole thing around. With these, if you're on a baking stone or a baking steel, they have a tendency to get the bottom too dark. This one's still doing okay. If that's the case, what I will do is I will transfer to a cookie sheet. And to do that, you just be very careful because everything's hot. Let's take it in further. Now you just spin it around and put it back in. And what you want to do is you want to cook it until it's golden brown, if not a little darker brown on the top. And you can take an internal temperature if you have a thermometer. One of the instant-read thermometers that is like this. You would insert it in the side or in the bottom, and you want it between 190 and 200 degrees. Another test you can take is if you take the bread out, flip it over, and plunk the bottom, it sounds very hollow. I will show you both of them when we get a little bit closer. So give it about 10 more minutes and we'll check the bread again. Okay, we're going to check it again. The first one might be done. It looks like it's getting there. Nice golden brown. Take my thermometer. We're at 200 degrees. I'd say we're done on this one. I want to be very careful taking it out because it is hot. Nice beautiful design. Nice golden brown. You want to put it on a cooling rack and just let it cool, and then we will wait for the other one to get done. It is doing beautifully also. Okay, here's our last one. Nice golden brown color on it. Take the thermometer and check it. Degrees, we're good. Now you want to be very careful taking this off of the pan because with the cuts in it, it's a little bit delicate now that it has come out of the oven. It hasn't settled up yet. I use a flat surface. You could use a spatula. Just be careful with it. Take it over and slide it onto your cooling rack, and there you go. You have 2 loaves of pumpkin bread, 2 different designs on them, and you want to let it cool before you cut and remove the string. All you would do is just lift it up a little bit, take a pair of scissors, snip the string, and just peel it back. So like I said, it doesn't have to be cold, but you want to let it cool some because it's still baking a little bit and it's setting up at this time. So that is it for the yeasted pumpkin bread. Just want to let you know that there will be a live online question and answer on February 24th, which is a Wednesday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. I will be there, so if you have any questions on this bread or any breads in general, I will do my best to answer them for you. So, until next time, good baking to everyone.